The airport buzzed with the usual chaos: rolling suitcases, crying babies, the distant echo of boarding announcements. But in the middle of it all, one man stood perfectly still. John Rivera, his military dress uniform pressed sharp, held a flag-draped urn close to his chest. His fingers tightened around it, knuckles turning white. Beside him, Rex, a German shepherd with a service vest, sat at attention, eyes locked on the airline counter. The check-in agent barely glanced up from her screen. "Sir, I need to see documentation for the dog." John's jaw clenched. He'd done this a dozen times before, flown home with Rex at his side. But today was different. Today, he wasn't just escorting himself. He was escorting Sergeant Daniel Carter, his friend, his brother in arms. "Ma'am," John said, voice low but firm, "this isn't a pet. He's a decorated service animal." The agent sighed, tapping her keyboard. "Policy requires paperwork, no exceptions." A line formed behind him. Someone coughed impatiently. Rex let out a soft whine, pressing closer to John's leg. The weight of the urn in John's arms felt heavier. He could feel the stares, curious, annoyed, indifferent. None of them understood. None of them knew the cost of what he carried. The agent slid a form across the counter. "Fill this out, or the dog doesn't fly." John's throat tightened. He looked down at Rex, then at the urn. The flag's edge fluttered in the AC breeze. Somewhere in the terminal, a child laughed. The world kept moving. But for John, in that moment, everything stopped. The fluorescent lights of the airport terminal blurred as John's mind snapped back to another place, another time. The scorching desert wind, the acrid smell of smoke, the deafening roar of gunfire. His grip on the urn tightened unconsciously. Rex, sensing the shift, leaned harder against his leg, grounding him. "Rex, find!" John's own voice echoed in his memory, raw with urgency. The command sent the dog bolting through rubble, paws kicking up dust as he zeroed in on the scent. A whine, a scratch at the debris. Then, miraculously, the faintest groan from beneath the wreckage. Daniel, alive. Back in the present, John blinked hard. The airline agent was still talking, her words muffled, distant. "Sir, did you hear me?" Rex's ears twitched. He hadn't forgotten either. The way Daniel had laughed weakly as they pulled him free, blood streaking his teeth. "Knew you'd come for me, brother?" A hand touched John's arm. The passenger behind him, an older man with kind eyes. "Son?" he murmured, nodding toward the counter. "They're waiting?" John exhaled. The urn in his arms wasn't just metal and fabric. It was the last promise he'd made, to bring Daniel home, no matter what. Rex let out a low, warning growl, not at the crowd, but at the agent's dismissive shrug. "No papers, no boarding." John's voice came out quieter than he intended. "You don't understand. This dog is a pet," the agent interrupted. "Next." The terminal noise rushed back in. A boarding call, a baby crying, the hum of the escalator. But beneath it all, John heard the echo of Daniel's voice, teasing. "Since when do you back down, Rivera?" Rex's tail stiffened. John straightened his shoulders. This wasn't over. The line behind John grew restless as the standoff continued. A woman in a business suit sighed loudly, checking her watch. The agent, Linda, according to her name tag, crossed her arms unmoved. "Regulations are regulations, sir. Your dog needs proper documentation, or he stays behind." John felt the weight of every eye in the terminal on him. Rex pressed closer, his warm fur a steady anchor against the rising tide of frustration. "Ma'am," John said, forcing calm into his voice. "Rex is a certified military working dog. He's been through more than most people ever will. This isn't about paperwork, it's about respect." Linda's expression didn't waver. "I don't make the rules. If you'd filled out the forms in advance." A teenage boy near the front of the line suddenly stepped forward, phone raised. "Hey, isn't that the K9 unit from the news? The one that saved those soldiers in Al-Assad?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. John didn't acknowledge it, but Rex's ears perked up at the mention of their old base. The memories flashed again. Rex alerting to an IED seconds before detonation. Rex dragging a wounded Marine to safety as bullets kicked up dirt around them. Linda hesitated, sensing the shift in the crowd. A man in a veteran's cap spoke up. "Let the man board. That dog's done more for this country than any of us." But Linda's supervisor arrived, a stern-faced man with a radio clipped to his belt. "Problem here?" John met his gaze evenly. "Just trying to escort my fallen brother home." He lifted the urn slightly, the flag catching the light. The supervisor's eyes flicked to Rex, then to the growing number of phones recording the scene. He cleared his throat. "We'll need to check with security." Rex let out a soft woof, as if to say, "Finally." But John knew better. This was just the first skirmish in a much longer battle. A hush fell over the crowd as Rex suddenly staggered, his legs buckling beneath him. A sharp gasp rippled through the terminal as the massive dog collapsed onto the polished floor with a thud, his body twitching unnaturally. John dropped to his knees, hands hovering over Rex's heaving sides. "Rex! Rex!" His voice cracked with raw panic, but then he saw it, the faintest flicker of the dog's eyelid, a signal, the old trick. "Somebody help!" a woman screamed. "The dog's dying!" Chaos erupted. Passengers surged forward, phones raised, capturing every second. The supervisor paled, radio clutched in a white-knuckled grip. "Medic! We need—" John cradled Rex's head, playing along. "Easy, boy, easy." His fingers brushed the hidden scar on Rex's flank, the one from the shrapnel that should have killed them both in Mosul. The dog's breathing grew more exaggerated, his whines pitiful and weak. A teenager in a hoodie yelled, "They did this! They stressed him out!" The accusation ignited the crowd. The supervisor backed up, hands raised. "We didn't." Then, like a switch flipping, Rex's seizure stopped. His head lifted, ears perked, as if nothing had happened. The crowd froze. John bit back a smirk. "Good boy." Rex licked his chops, then turned his big, soulful eyes directly toward Linda. A beat, two, then thump. His tail wagged once, hitting the floor with deliberate force. Silence. Then from the back of the crowd, a single slow clap. "Bravo," muttered a vet in a leather jacket. Linda's mouth hung open. The supervisor's radio crackled with frantic voices. "And John?" He scratched Rex's ears, whispering just loud enough for the agents to hear. "Guess we're both trained to handle impossible missions." The video exploded faster than anyone could have predicted. Within minutes, number Hero Dog versus Airline was trending. Clips of Rex's collapse played on loop, zoomed in, slowed down, set to dramatic music. A popular YouTuber paused the footage, circling the moment Rex peeked open one eye. "See that? This dog's a tactical genius." Airport Wi-Fi couldn't keep up with the flood of notifications pinging on passengers' phones. The teen who'd first recognized Rex was now live streaming to 50,000 viewers, narrating with barely contained glee. "Y'all seeing this? The manager looks like she's about to faint." John kept his face carefully neutral as he scrolled through the onslaught. A tweet from @MarineMom4Life. "My son served with K9 units. That German Shepherd has more honor in his paw than these pencil pushers have in their entire corporate handbook." The post had 12,000 likes in 8 minutes. Rex, ever the professional, remained statue still at John's side, though his tail gave one satisfied twitch when a little girl broke through the crowd to timidly offer him a pretzel. The supervisor's radio squawked again. "Corporate says clear the area now. PR team's inbound." His Adam's apple bobbed. "Sir, if you just—" "Too late," muttered the leather-clad vet, nodding toward the glass doors. 3 local news vans screeched to the curb, satellite antennas unfolding like mechanical flowers. John exhaled slowly. Somewhere above them, a plane roared into the sky. The flight he was supposed to be on, now departing without him. He adjusted his grip on the urn. Daniel would have loved this madness. Rex nudged his hand, as if to say, "Watch this." The CNN reporter spotted them first. Microphones converged like sharks to blood. And in that moment, John realized the mission had changed. This wasn't just about getting home anymore. This was about making sure the world never forgot what men like Daniel and dogs like Rex had sacrificed. The airline's corporate office erupted into chaos. CEO Robert Hargrove stared at the live news feed projected on the wall, his coffee forgotten and cooling. The ticker at the bottom of the screen screamed, "Airline under fire for treating war hero like second-class citizen." His PR director, Lisa, paced behind him, phone pressed to her ear. "No, we don't have a statement yet. Yes, I'm aware the stock is dropping." Robert's fingers drummed against the desk. The video kept playing. Rex's dramatic collapse, the crowd's outrage, the way that veteran had cradled the urn like it held the entire country's grief. A junior exec burst in. "Sir, the Pentagon just tweeted." She turned her tablet to show the official at Department of Defense account. "K-9 units are the backbone of our armed forces. Disrespect to them is disrespect to every service member. Stand with Rex." Robert's stomach dropped. Military backlash was the one thing they couldn't spin. Lisa hung up, her face pale. Veterans groups are organizing a boycott. 3 major influencers just posted about canceling their loyalty memberships. On screen, the veteran, John Rivera, according to the Chiron, spoke calmly to reporters. "All I wanted was to bring my brother home with dignity. Rex has saved more lives than anyone in this terminal, and they treated him like a nuisance." Robert made a decision. "Get me a private jet to that airport, now." Lisa blinked. "You're going there? In person?" He was already grabbing his jacket. "That urn isn't just carrying ashes, it's carrying a story. And right now," he pointed to the plummeting stock price on his monitor, "they're telling it better than we ever could." The airport's fluorescent lights buzzed like a swarm of angry bees as the crowd thickened around John and Rex. Cameras flashed, microphones jabbed forward, and the air hummed with tension. Then, a ripple through the crowd. A murmur spread like wildfire. "They called the cops." 2 uniformed officers pushed through, radios crackling. The taller one eyed Rex warily. "Sir, we've been asked to escort you off the premises." John didn't move. "I'm not leaving without completing my mission." His fingers brushed the folded flag atop the urn. The officer hesitated, then his partner's radio squawked. "All units, we've got a situation at Gate B-22. Multiple reports of static. Veterans assembling." A new voice cut through the noise. "Make that 24 veterans assembling." Heads turned. Near security, a group of men and women in leather vets' jackets, baseball caps, and fatigues stood shoulder to shoulder. At the front, a broad-chested Marine with a prosthetic arm folded his hands. "We heard there was a brother needing backup." The crowd erupted in cheers. Someone started chanting, "Let them board!" The officers exchanged glances. The taller one sighed, stepping back. "This isn't what we signed up for." Then, a hush. The airline CEO, Robert Hargrove, emerged from the sea of cameras, his tailored suit stark against the veteran's worn gear. He stopped 3 feet from John, his polished shoes reflecting the glare of overhead lights. For a long moment, no one breathed. Rex broke the silence with a single, decisive woof. Hargrove's shoulders slumped. He reached into his breast pocket, not for a phone, but for a small, folded paper. "On behalf of this airline," he said, loud enough for every microphone to catch, "I'd like to personally apologize and upgrade you both to first class." The terminal exploded in applause. John looked down at Rex. The dog's tail thumped once. Game over. The CEO's words hung in the air, but John didn't move. First class? An apology? That wasn't why they were here. Rex let out a low whine, pressing his nose against the urn. The message was clear. "Remember the mission." John met Hargrove's gaze. "With all due respect, sir," he said, voice steady, "this isn't about upgrades or publicity stunts. This is about respect for every soldier who's ever served, human and K-9. A murmur of agreement rolled through the crowd. The Marine with the prosthetic arm stepped forward. "Damn right." Hargrove's polished facade cracked. He glanced at the cameras, then at the urn in John's arms. For the first time, he seemed to truly see it. Not as a prop in a PR nightmare, but as what it was: someone's son, someone's brother, someone's best friend. The CEO's shoulders straightened. He turned to the nearest airline employee. "Get Gate B-22 cleared immediately. This flight will not leave without Sergeant Carter or his escort." Then, to everyone's shock, Hargrove knelt, expensive suit be damned, and held out a hand to Rex. "And you, soldier," he said, voice thick, "have more honor in your tail than this airline has shown in a decade." Rex, ever the diplomat, gave the man's fingers a polite lick. The crowd erupted. Camera shutters clicked furiously. Someone sobbed. John felt the weight in his arms lighten just a fraction. Somewhere he imagined Daniel laughing. "Took you long enough, Rivera." As they were escorted to the gate, the veterans fell into step behind them, an impromptu honor guard. Rex trotted proudly at John's side, head high. No more obstacles, no more delays, just the long-awaited journey home. The plane touched down under a slate-gray sky, rain streaking the windows like quiet tears. John carried the urn through the terminal, Rex walking solemnly at his side. Every step felt heavier now, not with burden, but with purpose. Daniel's widow, Sarah, stood waiting at arrivals, her hands clutching a folded flag of her own. When she saw John, her breath hitched. No words were needed. John held out the urn. Sarah's fingers trembled as she took it, pressing it to her chest like she could somehow absorb the last traces of warmth. Rex nudged her knee gently, his wet nose leaving a tiny mark on her jeans. Sarah laughed through her tears. "He always said you were the best partner he never had," she whispered to the dog. A small crowd had gathered, family, friends, a few local veterans holding flags. Someone had brought a balloon that read, "Welcome home," in cheerful letters. The contrast between the bright colors and the grief in Sarah's eyes was almost too much to bear. John cleared his throat. "Danny talked about you every day," he said. "Right up until—" Sarah nodded, cutting him off. She knew. Rex sat down with a soft thump, his tail sweeping the floor once. Then, as if on cue, he rested his chin on Sarah's shoe. A moment passed. The rain pattered against the windows. And then Sarah reached down, scratching behind Rex's ears. "You brought him all the way home," she murmured. "Both of you." John swallowed hard. Somewhere above them, the clouds broke. A single shaft of sunlight cut through the glass, landing on the urn in Sarah's arms. For the first time in months, John felt something unclench in his chest. Mission complete. The story didn't end at the airport. Weeks later, John sat at his kitchen table, scrolling through news articles on his laptop. The airline had announced a new policy: priority boarding for all military K-9 units, no paperwork required. Their stock had rebounded after a $1 million donation to veterans charities. Rex, sprawled at his feet, gnawed contentedly on a new chew toy. A gift from Sarah. A notification popped up. Another email from Hargrove. John skimmed it. "Would be honored if you and Rex could attend the ceremony." He deleted it. The doorbell rang. On his porch stood Linda, the airline agent from that day. Her uniform was gone, replaced by jeans and a t-shirt that read, "Veterans Advocate." She held out a manila envelope. "I quit," she said simply. John raised an eyebrow. She shrugged. "Turns out some rules are meant to be broken." Inside the envelope was a photo, Rex's dramatic collapse immortalized in a framed press shot. Linda had added a caption in Sharpie: "Best performance by a canine who was definitely not faking it." John laughed. Rex trotted over, sniffed the frame, then gave Linda's hand an approving lick. Later, as the sun set, John sat on the porch steps, scratching Rex's favorite spot behind his ears. The dog sighed happily, leaning into the touch. Somewhere out there, he knew, Daniel was grinning. And for the first time in a long time, the world felt right. Not because of apologies or policy changes, but because one stubborn soldier and one even more stubborn dog had reminded people what really mattered. Rex's tail thumped twice. No regrets. The small town park was packed tighter than a Memorial Day parade. News vans lined the curb, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like sunflowers chasing light. At the center of it all stood a bronze statue, draped in an American flag. Sarah stepped forward, her fingers brushing the fabric. "Ready?" she asked John. He nodded, adjusting his dress uniform. Rex, wearing a brand new service vest, sat at perfect attention beside him. With a gentle tug, Sarah pulled the flag away. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The statue wasn't just of a soldier, it was of a soldier kneeling beside a German shepherd, one hand resting on the dog's head. The plaque beneath read, "In honor of all who serve, on 2 legs or 4. John's throat tightened. He hadn't seen the design beforehand. A reporter whispered into her microphone, "The dog's likeness is based on Rex, the K9 who..." But John stopped listening, because Rex was moving. The real-life dog padded up to his bronze counterpart, sniffed it carefully, then, to everyone's delight, lifted his leg. The crowd erupted in laughter. Sarah doubled over, clutching her stomach. Even the stone-faced Marines cracked smiles. John shook his head. "Subtle," he muttered to Rex. The dog trotted back, tail wagging, clearly pleased with himself. As the ceremony continued, John watched sunlight glint off the statue's metal fur. It would last for decades, maybe centuries, long after he and Rex were gone. But today his partner was warm and alive beside him, panting softly in the afternoon heat. Some legacies weren't made of bronze. They walked home together side by side, just as they always had, and always would. The screen fades up on a sun-drenched backyard. John leans against a wooden fence, watching as Rex trots across the grass, not alone, but with a scruffy, tail-wagging companion at his side. A rescued Belgian Malinois named Duke, fresh from a military K9 adoption program, nips playfully at Rex's ears. John sips his coffee, smiling into the steam. The morning news plays softly from the kitchen window. Airline policy reforms continue to make headlines 1 year after the incident that started it all. He mutes it with a click of the remote. Some stories don't need replays. Rex flops down in the shade, panting as Duke pounces on a chew toy. The scars on the older dog's flank catch the light, badges of a life spent serving, surviving. John crouches, running a hand over Rex's fur. "Still the best partner I ever had," he murmurs. Rex responds by licking his wrist, then promptly stealing his hat. Laughter floats over from the porch. Sarah, balancing 2 plates of pancakes, shakes her head. "You two, never a dull moment." Duke abandons his toy to investigate the smell of bacon. John stands, stretching. The sun is warm, the coffee's still hot, and somewhere beyond the clouds, he knows Daniel's laughing too. This isn't an ending, it's just another mission. Different from the ones they train for, but no less important. Rex drops the hat at John's feet, tail thumping, ready for whatever's next. Share this story because every hero, human or K9, deserves to be remembered. If this story moved you, share it, because heroes come in all shapes, especially the furry ones.